When stars begin to die. Captain Nira Valdos stood on the observation deck of the Luminary's Grace, watching her homeworld die. The crystalline spires of Aetherius Prime, which had caught and refracted starlight for 3 millennia, were being methodically dismantled by machines older than recorded history. Each towering structure that fell sent ripples of anguish through the collective consciousness of her people. "Ma'am, we're receiving the evacuation count," reported Lieutenant Commander Jorik, his elongated features drawn with exhaustion. The Kethmori diplomat had been working without rest since the attack began, coordinating refugee ships across 17 systems. 43 billion souls saved. 97 billion... He paused, unable to finish. Gone. Nira completed the sentence with a whisper that seemed to echo in the vast chamber. Her pale, luminescent skin dimmed with grief as she watched another harvester construct emerge from the planet's crust. The machine was beautiful in its horror, a perfect geometric amalgamation of crystal and metal that pulsed with stolen energy from the planet's core. The harvesters had appeared without warning 3 rotations ago. Ancient beyond measure, they emerged from the deep void between galaxies like a plague of mechanical locusts. Their purpose was simple and absolute: consume all matter and energy to fuel their expansion. Worlds, stars, entire civilizations, nothing was sacred to their programming. "Captain," came the voice of Communications Officer Talon from behind her. "We've lost contact with the Centauri cluster. All 17 inhabited systems are showing null readings on long-range sensors." Nira closed her eyes, feeling the weight of countless lives extinguished in an instant. The Aetherian Confederacy had known peace for 8,000 years. Their technology was elegant, their culture refined, their military designed for exploration and protection rather than destruction. Against the harvesters, they were children with toys fighting a natural disaster. Ambassador Jorik approached with careful steps, his diplomatic robes rustling softly. "Captain, the High Council has authorized extreme measures. They're willing to consider unconventional allies." She knew what he meant. Every spacefaring species had heard whispers of the quarantine system at the galaxy's edge. Sol, Earth, the death world whose inhabitants had been deemed too dangerous for contact. Stories spoke of beings who had evolved on a planet where everything from the weather to the wildlife actively tried to kill them. They had split atoms and turned them into weapons against their own kind. They waged war with a creativity and brutality that made even the most aggressive species recoil in horror. "The Terrans," Nira breathed. The name carried weight in every civilized tongue, synonymous with violence, with necessary evil, with the kind of primitive savagery that polite society had evolved beyond. "The harvester patterns suggest they'll reach the Aetherian core worlds within 60 rotations. Jorik continued quietly. "If current consumption rates hold, they'll strip our entire sector within 200 rotations. The mathematical projections are absolute." Nira turned from the dying world below to face him fully. Her species communicated through subtle changes in their bioluminescent skin patterns as much as words, and her grief was painted in deep purples and blues across her face and arms. "How many of our people remain?" "Across all systems, perhaps 12 billion. The refugees are scattered across friendly territories, but nowhere is truly safe. The harvesters don't negotiate. They don't communicate. They simply consume and move on." Through the deck's vast transparasteel windows, another harvester construct breached the planet's mantle, this one larger than the previous machines. It began to methodically strip away the atmospheric processors that had taken generations to build. Soon, Aetherius Prime would be nothing but a barren rock, drained of every resource that had once made it a paradise. "Set course for the Sol system," Nira commanded, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was suggesting. "If we're going to die, we'll die having tried everything." Jorik's diplomatic training couldn't hide his shock. "Captain, the quarantine protocols exist for a reason. The Terrans are classified as a Class 7 aggressive species. First contact procedures recommend a minimum safe distance of 50 astronomical units and a full battle fleet for protection." "Do we have a full battle fleet, Ambassador?" Nira asked with bitter humor. "Do we have the luxury of safe distances? The harvesters are stripping the galaxy clean, and our elegant weapons barely scratch their hulls. Perhaps it's time to see what monsters can do to other monsters." As the Luminary's Grace powered its slip space engines and prepared to leave the Aetherian home system forever, Nira took one last look at the world that had birthed her species. The harvesters worked with mechanical precision, their forms graceful despite their purpose. In a way, they were not unlike her own people, beings of light and energy who had transcended mere flesh. The difference was that the Etherians had chosen to transcend toward beauty and peace. The harvesters had chosen to transcend toward perfect, endless consumption. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humanity waited. A species that had never needed to transcend anything because they had been forged in crucibles that would have destroyed lesser beings. Soon, the galaxy would discover which path created the stronger children. The Death World's answer. The luminary's grace dropped out of slip space at the edge of the Sol system, and Captain Nira Valdos immediately understood why humanity had been quarantined. Every sensor on her ship screamed warnings. The entire system was a fortress. Asteroid mining platforms converted to weapon batteries, patrol fleets that moved with predatory precision, and defensive installations that defied conventional physics. "Incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Talon, his voice tight with nervousness. "They're demanding we state our intentions. The translation matrix is struggling with their linguistic patterns. They have over 3,000 ways to describe different types of violence." Before Nira could respond, her ship shuddered under the lock of targeting systems. Dozens of human vessels had materialized around them. Sleek, angular ships that looked more like weapons than transport vehicles. Unlike Etherian designs, which flowed like living light, these craft were brutal in their efficiency. "This is Admiral Marcus Blackwood of the Terran Defense Force," came a gravelly voice over the comm. "You've got 30 seconds to explain why a Confederacy vessel just violated our quarantine before I turn you into cosmic dust." Nira steadied herself, allowing her bioluminescent patterns to shift to formal diplomatic configurations. "Admiral, I am Captain Nira Valdos of the Etherian Confederacy. We need your help. Our civilization is dying." A pause. Then, "Stand by." What followed was unlike any first contact protocol in Confederacy history. The humans didn't demand elaborate ceremonies or lengthy negotiations. Within minutes, Nira found herself aboard the human flagship Iron Resolve, walking through corridors that felt more like a military bunker than a starship. Everything was reinforced, redundant, designed to keep functioning even when damaged. She was escorted to a briefing room where she met the human delegation. Admiral Blackwood was exactly what she'd expected from his voice, scarred, graying, with eyes that had seen too much war. But beside him sat someone unexpected. Dr. Elena Vasquez was smaller than the other humans, with warm brown skin and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When their gazes met, Nira felt an odd flutter in her chest, something beyond the fear and desperation that had driven her here. "Dr. Vasquez is our leading xenobiologist," Admiral Blackwood explained curtly. "She'll be taking biological readings while you brief us on this threat." As Nira began explaining the harvester crisis, she found herself speaking as much to Elena as to the military officers. The human scientist asked perceptive questions about Etherian physiology, about how her people's light-based biology interfaced with technology, about their neural network consciousness. "Fascinating," Elena murmured, studying readings on her tablet. "Your entire species operates on quantum coherence patterns. You're essentially living light given form through crystalline matrices." She looked up, meeting Nira's gaze directly. "That's beautiful." Nira's skin patterns shifted involuntarily to warm golds and silvers, colors that, in Etherian culture, indicated attraction and interest. She hoped the humans couldn't interpret the meaning. When she finished describing the harvester's capabilities, the room fell silent. Finally, General Sophia Reyes, a stern woman with prosthetic arms that moved with mechanical precision, spoke. 10,000 systems consumed in 3 months, self-replicating, adaptive technology." She looked at Admiral Blackwood. "This is an extinction-level threat. Not just to them, to everyone." "Agreed," Blackwood said simply. Then, to Nira's shock, "We'll mobilize the fleet." "Just like that?" Ambassador Jorik asked, speaking for the first time since boarding the human ship. "No negotiations? No demands for compensation or territory?" Elena answered before the Admiral could. "When something threatens to end all life in the galaxy, you don't negotiate about the price of stopping it." She paused, then added more softly, "Besides, no one should face extinction alone." Over the next few hours, as the human military machine began its mobilization, Elena gave Nira a tour of their research facilities. The human approach to science was as aggressive as their approach to warfare. They pushed boundaries that more cautious species wouldn't dare approach. "We've been monitoring galactic communications for decades," Elena explained as they walked through a laboratory filled with technologies that would have been banned in Confederacy space. "We knew about the various species, about the quarantine. Most of our people figured we'd always be alone out here." "Does that sadden you?" Nira asked, genuinely curious. Elena paused by a viewport showing Earth in the distance. "Sometimes, but isolation taught us self-reliance. We learned to solve our own problems, fight our own battles. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs now." Their conversation was interrupted by an aide rushing up to Elena. "Dr. Vasquez, the Admiral wants you in strategic planning. They're discussing the harvester technology." As they made their way to the planning room, Elena's hand briefly touched Nira's arm. "I know this must be terrifying for you. Losing your world, having to trust strangers who have a reputation for violence. But I want you to know we're not monsters. We're just very good at becoming monsters when we need to be." The strategic planning session revealed the true scope of human military capability. They possessed weapons that violated several galactic peace treaties, antimatter warheads, relativistic projectiles, something called gray goo scenarios that made even Nira's limited military knowledge recoil in horror. "The harvesters adapt to conventional attacks," Admiral Blackwood explained, pointing to tactical displays. "So we won't give them time to adapt. We'll hit them with everything at once. Weapons they've never encountered, strategies that don't follow conventional warfare patterns." "You're talking about genocide," Ambassador Jorik said quietly. "Yes," General Reyes replied without hesitation. "Complete eradication. The harvesters have already committed genocide against hundreds of species. They'll do it to hundreds more if we let them survive." As the meeting continued, Nira found herself studying Elena's profile. The human woman's calm acceptance of necessary violence fascinated and frightened her. Etherians resolved conflicts through consensus and compromise. Humans, it seemed, resolved them through overwhelming application of force. Later, as they prepared for the joint fleet to depart for Harvester space, Elena approached Nira privately. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Elena began, "about your people's quantum coherence. I think I might be able to create a temporary interface. Let me experience how you perceive the universe." "That would be intimate," Nira replied, her patterns shifting to deeper purples. "Etherians don't share consciousness lightly." Elena stepped closer, and Nira caught her scent, something uniquely human, warm and alive in a way that made her pulse quicken. "I understand. But if we're going to fight together, maybe we should understand each other better." As Elena's hand found hers, Nira made a decision that would have scandalized the Confederacy High Council. She opened her consciousness to the human scientist, sharing the sensation of existing as living light, of feeling the quantum foam that underlied reality. Elena gasped, her pupils dilating as she experienced perception beyond human senses. For a moment, they existed in a shared space between their kinds of awareness. Light and flesh, quantum and classical, peace and violence. When they separated, both were breathing hard. "That was," Elena began. "Unprecedented," Nira finished. Around them, the combined human-Etherian fleet prepared for war. But in that moment, two individuals from utterly different worlds had found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. They had found each other. The Hunter's Gambit. The first battle against the Harvesters took place in the ruins of what had once been the Kepler Nexus, a thriving system of 12 worlds that now existed only as expanding clouds of processed matter. Captain Rex, Void Hunter Morrison, watched from the bridge of his stealth corvette as the combined human-Etherian fleet dropped out of slipspace into hell itself. The Harvester ships defied description. Each one was a writhing mass of crystalline structures and organic technology, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. They moved through space like living things, pulsing with stolen energy from a dozen dead civilizations. The largest construct was the size of a small moon, its surface crawling with smaller harvester units that detached and reattached in complex patterns. "Sweet Mother of God," breathed Morrison's navigator, Lieutenant Torres. "There must be 500 of them." 537, corrected the ship's AI with mechanical precision. Mass readings indicate significant resource accumulation. They've been feeding here for weeks. On the main fleet channel, Admiral Blackwood's voice cut through the shocked silence. All units, this is Blackwood. Remember, these things adapt. We get one surprise attack before they start learning our tactics. Make it count. Morrison's ship, the Phantom Edge, was part of the first wave, elite human special forces tasked with infiltrating the largest harvester construct. While the main fleet engaged the smaller vessels, Morrison and his team would attempt to learn how the harvesters communicated and coordinated their attacks. Initiating active camouflage, Morrison announced as his ship shimmered and seemed to vanish against the backdrop of stars. Human stealth technology had been developed during centuries of warfare against each other, an arms race that had produced innovations no peaceful species would have imagined. As they approached the massive harvester construct, Morrison opened a secure channel to Dr. Elena Vasquez aboard the Iron Resolve. Her voice carried tension but also determination. Rex, we're reading quantum entanglement signatures from that big construct. It might be their command node, a way for individual harvesters to share information instantly across vast distances. Copy that, Doc. Any idea how to shut it down? Working on it. Just try not to get consumed, okay? Nira would never forgive me if something happened to you. Morrison grinned despite the circumstances. The developing relationship between the human scientist and the Etherian captain had become an open secret among the fleet. In the face of possible extinction, love had found a way to bloom between two entirely different species. The Phantom Edge slipped through the harvester construct's outer defenses, passing through what looked like a crystalline forest of processing nodes. Each structure hummed with activity as it broke down matter at the molecular level and transformed it into more harvester components. Jesus, whispered Torres. They're not just consuming the planets. They're learning from them. Look at those adaptation chambers. Morrison saw what she meant. Sections of the construct were experimenting with different configurations, testing new weapon designs based on analysis of their previous battles. The harvesters weren't just a mindless swarm. They were an intelligence actively evolving to become better killers. Contact in 30 seconds, reported their sensor officer. I'm detecting what might be a central processing core. Massive quantum computation matrix, unlike anything in our databases. As they prepared to dock with the core structure, Morrison's comm crackled with updates from the main battle. The human fleet was performing better than expected against the harvester swarm, but the cost was mounting. 3 destroyers had been lost when their crews attempted conventional boarding actions, only to discover that harvester ships could reconfigure their internal structures in real time, trapping and consuming the attackers. This is different, Morrison muttered, studying the readouts as his team prepared for insertion. They're not just machines. There's something aware behind all this. The boarding action went smoothly at first. Morrison's team, equipped with powered armor and weapons designed for ship-to-ship combat, cut through the construct's outer barriers and penetrated what appeared to be its central nervous system. The interior was a maze of crystalline corridors that pulsed with data streams. Then they found the core. It wasn't a computer in any sense they understood. It was a fusion of organic neural tissue and quantum processing matrices, a brain the size of a building that pulsed with malevolent intelligence, and it was aware of them. Prime Nexus acknowledges your presence, humans. A voice spoke directly into their minds, bypassing their comm systems entirely. Your species is interesting, violent, creative. The Prime Nexus will preserve samples when your galaxy is consumed. Morrison's team opened fire, but their weapons seemed to have little effect on the massive intelligence. Worse, the entire construct began to shift around them, walls flowing like liquid as the harvester adapted to their presence. Rex! Elena's voice crackled through static. We're reading massive quantum fluctuations. That thing is trying to download information about our technology through your neural implants. Morrison felt it then, a cold presence probing at the edges of his mind, trying to access his memories of human military capabilities. The harvester intelligence was attempting to learn everything about humanity's weapons and tactics in real time. Team, emergency extraction, he shouted, but it was too late. The corridors had sealed themselves, trapping them inside the construct. The harvester intelligence pressed deeper into their minds, and Morrison felt classified information beginning to slip away. Then something unexpected happened. The cold presence in his mind recoiled suddenly, as if burned. Morrison realized that while the Harvester could access his tactical knowledge, it couldn't comprehend the emotional context that drove human warfare. The sheer irrational fury that humans brought to combat, the willingness to die rather than surrender, was alien to its logical processes. "Torres, remember basic training," Morrison shouted. "Remember the drill instructors? The fear, the anger? Don't think tactically, think emotionally." His team understood. Instead of trying to fight the mental intrusion logically, they flooded their minds with pure human emotion. Rage at seeing innocent worlds consumed, protective fury for their loved ones, the berserker madness that had carried their species through millions of years of evolution on a death world. The Harvester, intelligence screamed, and psychic shriek that resonated through the construct's quantum matrices. It had tried to download human tactical knowledge but had instead been infected with something it couldn't process. The chaotic, self-destructive passion that made humans fight harder when defeat seemed certain. Morrison's team blasted their way out of the construct as it began to convulse around them. They reached their ship just as the massive Harvester began to tear itself apart, its logic circuits unable to reconcile the contradictory impulses of human emotion. As the Phantom Edge raced back to the fleet, Morrison opened a channel to the Iron Resolve. "Elena, tell me you got those readings. That thing, it's not just intelligent. It's a hive mind, but one that thinks purely in terms of efficient resource consumption. Human emotions are like a virus to it." "I got it all, Rex," Elena replied, her voice filled with excitement. "And I think I know how to weaponize it." The first battle was ending. The human fleet had lost 6 ships, but they had destroyed nearly half the Harvester force and learned something crucial. Their enemy's greatest strength, its logical, efficient intelligence, might also be its greatest weakness when faced with the beautiful, terrible irrationality of human nature. As the fleet regrouped to plan their next assault, Morrison couldn't help but smile grimly. The Harvesters had made one crucial error. They had tried to understand humans through logic and analysis, but humans weren't meant to be understood. They were meant to be experienced in all their contradictory, violent, passionate glory. And that experience, Morrison suspected, would prove toxic to any intelligence that valued order over chaos. The hunt was just beginning. What monsters do. The War Council meeting aboard the Iron Resolve had been going for 6 hours, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a blade. High Counselor Zephyr of the Etherian Confederacy stood rigidly at one end of the holographic display, his normally serene features twisted with barely contained horror. "Absolutely not," he said for the 10th time. "What you're proposing isn't warfare. It's the complete annihilation of a species. We cannot be party to genocide, no matter the circumstances." Admiral Blackwood's scarred face remained impassive. "Counselor, in the past week, these Harvesters have consumed 43 more systems. 60 billion sentient beings are dead. How many more need to die while we debate ethics?" Dr. Elena Vasquez sat beside Captain Nira Valdos, their hands intertwined beneath the table. Over the past month of joint operations, their relationship had deepened beyond mere attraction. Elena had learned to read the subtle language of Nira's bioluminescent patterns, while Nira had grown to appreciate the fierce loyalty that burned beneath Elena's scientific demeanor. But now, that relationship was being tested by the weight of impossible choices. The quantum emotion virus worked on individual constructs, Elena explained quietly, her voice cutting through the argument. But the Prime Nexus adapted faster than we anticipated. Each successive battle, they've become more resistant to psychological warfare. General Sophia Reyes leaned forward, her prosthetic fingers drumming against the table. "Which brings us back to the original proposal, the Omega Protocol." Nira felt Elena's hand tighten in hers at the mention of humanity's most classified weapon. Over their growing intimacy, Elena had shared fragments of what the Omega Protocol represented, a weapon so devastating that its very existence was known to fewer than a dozen people in human space. "Explain it again," Nira said softly, though part of her didn't want to hear it. President Victoria Cross, attending via quantum entanglement communicator from Earth, spoke with the weight of absolute authority. "The Omega Protocol is a causality weapon. It doesn't just destroy matter, it retroactively prevents it from ever having existed. Applied to the Harvester home galaxy, it would erase their entire species from the timeline. But," Elena added, her voice heavy with the moral implications. Using it would mark humanity as the most dangerous species in the known universe. Every civilization would have proof that we possess weapons capable of rewriting reality itself. Ambassador Jorik, who had remained silent through most of the debate, finally spoke. The political ramifications alone. Even if this saves the Confederacy, how do we explain to our people that we survived only by allying with beings capable of erasing entire timelines? High Counselor Zephyr's luminescent skin patterns shifted to deep crimsons, colors of anger and moral outrage. This is exactly why your species was quarantined. You don't just fight wars, you fight existence itself. Admiral Blackwood stood slowly, his presence commanding attention from everyone in the room. Counselor, with respect, your people called us. You didn't call us when you wanted diplomats or philosophers. You called us when you needed killers. Well, this is what killers do when everything else has failed. The room fell silent except for the hum of ship systems. In the distance, through the viewport, the remnants of the Harvester fleet could be seen regrouping around a captured dwarf star. Intelligence reports indicated they were using the star's energy to mass-produce a new generation of constructs, ones specifically designed to resist human weapons and tactics. Nira found herself caught between two worlds, literally and figuratively. Her people's moral philosophy demanded the preservation of all life, even their enemies. But she had also seen the Harvester consumption processes firsthand. There was no negotiation possible with an intelligence that viewed all other life as raw materials. Elena, she said quietly, tell me honestly, if we do this, if humanity uses this weapon, what happens to your people afterward? Elena's dark eyes met hers, and Nira could read the pain there without any need for bioluminescent translation. We become the monsters under the bed that every species tells stories about. The galaxy will never trust us, never fully accept us. We'll be necessary, perhaps even appreciated, but always feared. And if we don't use it, the Harvesters adapt to everything we've thrown at them. Our current projections show complete galactic consumption within 18 months. Every living thing dies. President Cross's voice cut through the intimate exchange. The decision has been made at the highest levels of human government. We will not watch the galaxy die while debating moral philosophy. The Omega Protocol is authorized. High Counselor Zephyr recoiled as if struck. Then the Etherian Confederacy formally withdraws from this alliance. We will not be complicit in temporal genocide. Counselor, Nira said, standing suddenly, I respectfully request permission to remain with the human fleet as an independent observer. The shock on Zephyr's face was mirrored by similar expressions around the room. Captain Valdos, you cannot seriously be considering. I am considering that someone needs to witness what happens here. Someone needs to record the choice that was made and why. She squeezed Elena's hand once more before releasing it. And someone needs to ensure that if humanity becomes the galaxy's monster, at least one person remembers that they became monsters for us. The meeting dissolved into smaller arguments and tactical discussions, but Elena and Nira found themselves alone on the observation deck where they had shared their first consciousness merge weeks earlier. You don't have to stay, Elena said softly. This isn't your burden to carry. It became my burden the moment I asked for your help, Nira replied. Her skin patterns had shifted to a complex mixture of blues and golds, love and sorrow intertwined. Elena, when this is over, what happens to us? Elena looked out at the stars, each point of light representing billions of lives hanging in the balance. I don't know. Maybe your people will be right to fear us. Maybe we'll prove that the quarantine should never have been lifted. Or maybe, Nira said, moving closer until they were almost touching, you'll prove that even monsters can choose to love something more than they love destruction. They kissed then, with the weight of two civilizations' futures pressing down on them. It was a kiss that tasted of desperation and hope in equal measure, a moment of perfect intimacy before the universe changed forever. 24 hours later, the human fleet moved into position around the Harvester home galaxy. The Omega Protocol weapon, a device no larger than a briefcase but capable of unmaking entire timelines, was armed and ready. Admiral Blackwood's final transmission to the Etherian fleet was simple. History will judge whether we were heroes or monsters, but there will be a history to make that judgment. As the weapon fired, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the Harvester galaxy was simply gone. Not destroyed, not transformed, but erased from existence as if it had never been. In the aftermath, as the implications of what humanity had done rippled through the quantum foam of space-time, Elena and Nira held each other and wondered what price their love would pay for the galaxy's survival. They were about to find out. The price of peace. 6 months after the Omega Protocol's deployment, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the gardens of New Aetherios, watching impossible flowers bloom in patterns that defied three-dimensional geometry. The Aetherian refugees had built their new world with typical grace, creating beauty from the ashes of their scattered civilization. But Elena could see the subtle signs of change: defensive installations hidden among the crystalline spires, early warning systems disguised as art installations. Even the Aetherians were learning to live with fear. "The quantum resonance readings are stable," Captain Nira Valdos said, approaching with data tablets that glowed with soft bioluminescent interfaces. "No temporal echoes from the protocol's activation. Reality seems to have accepted the change." Elena turned to study her lover's face. Over the past months, Nira's luminescent patterns had developed new complexities, colors and configurations that hadn't existed in traditional Aetherian culture. She was changing, adapting to a universe that was suddenly darker and more dangerous than her people had ever imagined. "The Galactic Assembly reconvenes next week," Elena said quietly. "Have you decided what you're going to tell them?" Nira's patterns shifted to deep purples shot through with silver, uncertainty tinged with determination. "The truth, that humanity chose to save the galaxy, and that the price of that salvation was becoming something that everyone would fear." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Blackwood and President Cross, who had traveled to New Aetherios for the preliminary hearings. The Admiral looked older, worn down by months of political scrutiny and moral questioning. President Cross carried herself with the same authority as always, but Elena could see the cost in the lines around her eyes. "Dr. Vasquez, Captain Valdos." President Cross nodded to each of them. "I trust you've reviewed the Assembly's preliminary findings." Elena had indeed read the report. In the 6 months since the Omega Protocol's deployment, the surviving civilizations of the galaxy had conducted extensive investigations into humanity's capabilities. The findings were both terrifying and reassuring. Terrifying because they confirmed that humans possessed the ability to unmake entire timelines. Reassuring because they had used that power only once, and only to prevent galactic extinction. "The vote tallies are interesting," Admiral Blackwood said with dry humor. 43 civilizations voting to maintain humanity's quarantine status. 39 voting for limited integration. 12 abstaining. "And the Aetherian Confederacy?" Elena asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Split," Nira admitted. "The High Council voted to maintain distance from humanity. But a significant faction, led by those who survived the Harvester attacks, supports integration. They remember who came when we called for help." The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Humanity had saved the galaxy, but their reward was to be more isolated than ever. The other species now knew exactly what humans were capable of, and that knowledge bred fear even among those they had saved. President Cross pulled up a holographic display showing galactic political boundaries. Human space remained a small bubble at the galaxy's edge, but now it was surrounded by a much wider buffer zone, systems that served as neutral territory between humanity and everyone else. "The compromise proposal is elegant in its way," she explained. "Humanity becomes the galaxy's immune system. We maintain our territory and our technology, but we also accept responsibility for dealing with future existential threats. When something emerges that conventional civilizations can't handle, they call us professional monsters," Elena murmured. "Professional protectors," Nira corrected gently. "There's a difference." Over the following days, Elena watched the Assembly debates with growing fascination. The galaxy's representatives struggled with the fundamental question of what to do with a species that had proven itself both necessary and terrifying. Some called for humanity's complete exile. Others argued for full integration, reasoning that it was better to have dangerous allies than dangerous unknowns. High Counselor Zephyr, speaking for the Aetherian traditionalists, made the case for maintaining the quarantine. "The humans have shown us the depths of their capabilities," he declared. "They possess weapons that can rewrite the fundamental laws of existence. How can any civilization coexist with such power?" But it was Captain Rex Morrison, representing the human military contingent, who provided the most compelling counter-argument. "Counselor Zephyr, with respect, you called us because your peaceful methods weren't working. We came, we bled for strangers. We used our most terrible weapons not for conquest, but for protection. If that doesn't earn us the right to exist alongside you, then what would?" The final vote was closer than anyone had predicted. By a margin of just 7 votes, the Assembly chose limited integration. Humanity would be allowed to maintain diplomatic and trade relationships, but with strict oversight and monitoring. More importantly, they would be formally recognized as the galaxy's crisis response force, the species to call when conventional solutions failed. Elena found herself oddly moved by the ceremony that followed. Representatives from dozens of species formally thanked humanity for their sacrifice, even as they made it clear that humans would never be fully trusted. It was recognition and rejection intertwined. Afterward, she and Nira walked through New Etherios' memory gardens, where holographic monuments commemorated the worlds lost to the harvesters. The displays showed not just Etherian colonies, but also the dozens of other species that had been consumed before humanity intervened. "Do you regret it?" Nira asked suddenly. "What your people became to save us?" Elena considered the question seriously. "I regret the necessity of it. I regret that the universe is hostile enough to require weapons like the Omega Protocol, but I don't regret that we were willing to use them when everything else failed." They paused before a monument to Etherios Prime, Nira's lost homeworld. The hologram showed the planet in its full glory, crystal spires reaching toward the sky, bioluminescent forests that painted the landscape in shifting colors, cities that existed in harmony with their environment. "My people will rebuild," Nira said softly. "We'll create new worlds, new art, new beauty, but we'll never again be as innocent as we were. The galaxy has changed, and we've changed with it. Is that necessarily bad?" Elena asked. "Your people were peaceful, but that peace made you vulnerable. Now you're learning to be peaceful and strong." Nira's patterns shifted to warm golds and deep blues, love mixed with wisdom hard-won through loss. Perhaps that's humanity's gift to us. Not just salvation from the harvesters, but the knowledge that survival sometimes requires becoming something you never wanted to be. They were interrupted by a communication alert. Admiral Blackwood's voice crackled through their implants. "All personnel, we have a developing situation in the Andromeda sector. Unknown energy signatures, possible hostile intent. The Assembly is invoking Article 7 of the Protection Accords." Elena and Nira looked at each other, both understanding what this meant. Article 7 was the clause that formally authorized human military intervention in existential threats. The galaxy was calling its monsters again. "How long until we need to leave?" Nira asked. Elena checked the tactical displays flowing through her implants. "Transport ships are being prepped now. We could be on our way within the hour." Nira nodded, her patterns shifting to the complex configurations that had become her personal signature, traditional Etherian beauty touched with the harder edges of experience. "Then we'd better go. The galaxy needs its protectors." As they made their way to the spaceport, Elena reflected on the strange path that had brought them together. A year ago, she had been a xenobiologist studying theoretical alien contact protocols. Now she was part of humanity's diplomatic corps, in love with an alien captain, preparing to face whatever new threat had emerged from the dark between the stars. The galaxy had gained an immune system, but at the cost of its innocence. Humanity had gained acceptance, but only as necessary monsters. And Elena had gained love, but love that would always exist in the shadow of the terrible things they might need to do. As their transport lifted off from New Etherios, Elena took Nira's hand and watched the stars wheel overhead. Each point of light represented trillions of lives that existed because humanity had been willing to become what the galaxy needed them to be. It wasn't the future she had dreamed of as a young scientist, but it was a future where love could bloom between species, where beauty could exist alongside strength, where monsters could choose to protect rather than destroy. Perhaps, Elena thought as they jumped to slip space, that was enough. Perhaps that was everything. The call had come again, and the Death Worlders would answer. Not because they wanted to, but because someone had to stand in the darkness. And in that darkness, love and duty would burn as twin flames, lighting the way for all who followed. The galaxy was safe. The price had been paid, and the monsters had chosen to be protectors after all.